till now, we've not even really done a honeymoon. We've not shut up.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there.
Okay, we are right back. We're ready to talk about how to detoxify your ego. And you haven't subscribed to Salt Nation TV, please take a moment right now to subscribe. Hello guys, and welcome to the Just Saying podcast. Today I'm in the office and I'm recording from the office, but I have something really interesting to share with you today. This one goes out to most of the young men out there who might be struggling with the idea of getting married, who are struggling with trying to make that decision to take that step forward. I'm going to be sharing a really interesting topic with you today. I'm going to be sharing why I almost regretted getting married. I'm going to be sharing why I almost regretted getting married. Now, I thought about naming this podcast Why I Regretted Getting Married, but on second thought, I realized that I'm still happily married, so it's an almost that does the job much better. So I'm going to be sharing some really interesting revelations that I have had over the few years that I've been married, and how these things have helped morph my mentality about marriage and have helped me become the man that I'm becoming. On the Just Saying podcast, one of the things that we like to do is talk about family, talk about leadership, talk about manhood, talk about masculinity, and life in general, things that revolve around those topics. So if you like what we share here, if you like the idea of what we do, if you like the messages that you find on Salt Nation TV, why not just take a moment to subscribe, click the notification bell to know when we release more juicy content for you. And straight into today's topic, I'm going to be talking about why I almost regretted getting married. Here we go. Okay, I remember, I just cast my mind back, and I remember a particular situation that I had as a young married man. I think it was probably a year or two into my marriage, and I remember distinctly just packing my bag. You know, in Africa, that's strange because it's often always the other way around. It's often always the woman who packs her bag to leave, or the man who sends the woman out. But in this situation, as I recall, I packed my bags and I just left. I was so pissed, and for the love of me, I cannot remember why I was so angry at the time. I can't remember right now, but that just goes to tell you that oftentimes the way we make our spouse feel stays much longer than the very things that we did. So it's much easier to forget the actions that led to you feeling slighted or hurt or disrespected or dishonored, but we often always remember the way we feel. And that's one of the strongest memories that I have in my 5 years of being married. And the fact that it stands out so strongly, even though I can't remember what happened, is just a pointer for us to understand how key the sentiment behind our actions is. I often tell people that it doesn't matter the logic behind your actions. If you made your spouse feel a certain type of way, you owe them a responsibility to remedy that situation, even if you've rationalized it in your head and you don't think you are wrong. The way you make them feel is just as important as the thing that you do or do not do, as the case may be. So why did I almost regret getting married? I'm going to be sharing a few points because it's not just one thing. As I tried to come up with an outline for this podcast, I began to reflect on the number of things that led to that despair and frustration, and I realized it wasn't just one thing. It was actually a number of things, and I'm going to be sharing those things with you in today's podcast. So one of the things that I find really frustrating in my life is feeling out of control, feeling like I'm not in charge, feeling like And I think this is something that is common to most men. I think that men are built naturally by nature to be leaders, and so oftentimes it's really difficult for us to cope when we don't feel in charge, when we don't feel like we're steering the ship. And I think that's one of the first most profound feelings that I had once I got married, because I struggle so much with dealing with that issue. I remember when we moved into our previous house, I remember there was this time because when we moved into the house, we had nothing. Basically, we didn't even have sitting room furniture and stuff. We had plastic seats here and there, and then we had a plastic table in the center, and then we had this it was actually now that I think about it, it was actually my wife's sewing machine, the base, the table, so to speak, of the sewing machine, that we just covered with a cloth and put our 32-inch TV on top of it. So I was desperate to get furniture into the house and make the sitting room more presentable, so that when I'm welcoming visitors, at least there's somewhere for them to sit. So I remember getting some money together and meeting a furniture designer, and she did a very great job with the furniture and everything. So I remember the day we brought it. It was brought to the house, and we wanted to take it in, and we found out that I didn't measure the size of the door. So the door was too small for the furniture to pass through. And so oftentimes when you're faced with that kind of situation, you always feel like there's always got to be a way, for you to deal with this issue. So flip it, turn it this way, remove the leg, turn this. We did everything, and it just couldn't go in. The door was just too small, right? We tried everything, and I remember feeling so helpless. I remember feeling so frustrated, because I'm someone that I can't believe that there's not something that can be done. I'm someone that believes that there's always a way out, there's always a way around or out of every situation. So it was really difficult for me to deal with, and I remember that feeling of helplessness, and that same feeling of helplessness was what I felt as a newly married man oftentimes, and there are many reasons why. Now, let me give you a little background. My wife is the first daughter, and in Igbo culture, you will understand what it means for her to be the first daughter. She's the Ada, and as the Ada, what that means in Igbo culture, the Ada is such a powerful position in the family. The Ada, as she grows into her position and her influence in the family, often even has more say than the men in some issues, has more say than the mother, than the father in some issues. She becomes the home manager, the home owner. She becomes not owner, but basically the one that steers the ship from a position that is not really the captain. So it's a very influential position. And my wife, coming from that background, comes into this marriage union, and then she's married to me, and I want to be in charge, right? And I find that she has a very strong opinion about so many things, and it was really difficult for me to cope with that, because strangely many of us as men come into marriage with this mentality of, okay, now it's time for me to build my kingdom, and we have preconceived notions and ideas of the things we want to do in our marriage, how we want our family to flow, how we want our wife to serve us food, how we want, one very key instance is growing up in my family. My dad, every time he's hungry, my mom serves the food, places it in a beautiful tray, and all of that, and there's all the razzmatazz that comes with it, and then she presents it to him, and unconsciously these are the things you're dreaming of having as a married man, and then you marry someone who thinks that is ideal to just eat together with your spouse, and so she's always setting the food, and you guys have to eat together, so to speak, and it becomes really, really difficult to cope with some of these changes and some of these differences that you have to deal with. So I remember distinctly one of the challenges that I had was with coping with that difference in dynamics, that difference in relational understanding, and so I found that within me, I always wanted to be 100% in charge. And now here is the kicker. I wanted to be 100% in charge, but I also wanted someone to love me. I also wanted someone to be in love with me. But you find that in itself is a paradox. That in itself is not quite 100% attainable. Now, this is the reason. To be in love with somebody, you have to have a certain degree of contribution to that person. You have to have a certain degree of give and take. There has to be something you're adding to that person, something you're getting from that person, such that you can look at that person with pride and say, okay, I've contributed to what my husband has become, I've contributed to what my wife has become, I've contributed in some way to, the dynamics of what she is becoming or what he is becoming. And that helps foster love. That helps foster, the feeling of bonding and affection, in a marriage. So I found that always wanting to be 100% in charge and finding that I actually didn't even have as much as 40% in reality was really frustrating. And so oftentimes I found that I needed to pick my battles. I needed to, or like my guys would say, I needed to choose a struggle. Did I want to be 100% in charge, or did I want to be in love with someone who was in love with me and who could contribute to who I was becoming, who could contribute equally to the building of the home that we were building, to the family that we were building? And the second thing that I noticed was the problem why I almost regretted getting married was because I wanted to be perceived as an individual. I wanted to be able to be unattached, to be aloof, to not be seen as what some people will call a woman rapper, right? So oftentimes men, you get married, but you still want to maintain the independence that you had as a single person. Now, this is really difficult also because you want that, but you also want your wife to depend on you. You want your spouse to depend on you. So it's a very weird dynamic that we find ourselves in as a young married man. And it's really difficult if you don't know how to handle it. It's very easy to become a tyrant, right? Because I just cast my mind back. When I got married recently, I would always cast my mind back to when I was single. When I was a bachelor, there were things I could just do them, right? Because my life was mine, my decisions were mine to make. I could stay out as long as I wanted. I could, go for night vigil 10 days in, back to back to back. I could hang out with friends. I could sleep in a friend's house. I could come back whenever I wanted. My life was my own. And you find that when you get married, one of the first things that happen is that you now have someone you have to report to. You have someone you have to take decisions together with. And it really became very frustrating for me, right? Because I wanted to still be an individual. I wanted to still, in some sense, be unattached, be aloof. But you find that in real essence, marriage is two people becoming one. And so when two people become one, you find that if you truly understand, these were the revelations to me at least, that as I began to understand more deeply what it meant for two to become one, I began to understand that marriage actually to a great degree meant losing yourself, meant losing the very things, the very freedoms that you've always had. And that doesn't mean you're not free, but it does mean that it is two people that are being free at the same time. In other words, your freedom affects this person's freedom. So if I'm free to do whatever, it affects my wife. If my wife is free to do whatever, it affects me. So I am no longer free without limits. I'm free in consideration to someone else, right? And so I have to make decisions carefully. I have to have consultations with my spouse. And I really struggled with this. I remember sitting down one day, or rather waking up one morning and just telling myself, Chidike, who sent you? Right? Like, how did you get into this? I just felt stuck. I really felt stuck, and it was more painful because I felt like there was nothing I could do about it. But as the years have gone by, I found that I was just going through a period of accepting my new status as a married man and what that entailed. The third thing that really almost made me, that I struggled with, that made me almost regret getting married, was that I wanted to be perceived as inerrant. I wanted to be perceived as capable. You know, I wanted to be perceived as almost, I don't want to use the word perfect, but yeah, in some sense that's what I was going for. I wanted to be to my wife this guy who didn't get things wrong, whose advice was always spot on, who knew what he was doing at every point in time. So, and when I tried to give suggestions or contribute something to her, and the fact that she could even have an alternate view on anything infuriated me. And I have no idea, for the love of me, why that was the case, right? But I found that it was infuriating to me. I would always like, she this girl no say I be a husband, right? Why go they talk, you they talk? And this is not even situations where she's being rude. This is just situations where she's trying to bounce ideas off me when I already have a fixed mindset about things, right? So I wanted to be perceived as inerrant, I wanted to be perceived as capable, but I also didn't want a docile wife. I also didn't want a wife who didn't contribute anything. So you find that this is also under catch-22 that we find ourselves in, because you have to pick your struggle, like which fight you want to fight, really, right? Because if you do not, because you find that many men want to have the final say, as you should, as the man of the house. However, we want to have the final say, and we want to have the only say that counts. And having the final say is what that means is that you have the final say, having considered the plethora of ideas and suggestions that have come up, right? If you just have the final say and your final say is the only say, then that's not really leadership, right? So, but I found myself in that situation where I wanted to be perceived as perfect, but I also didn't want a docile wife, and that's a catch-22 that I found myself in. Interestingly, I found that the thing that pissed me off the most was not that her ideas were safe. The thing that pissed me off the most was that her ideas were brilliant, but not brilliant in an otherworldly way, not brilliant in a way that she was saying something I've never had before, but brilliant in the fact that it was so basic that I often wondered why I hadn't thought about it. Have you ever wondered, your wife has given you a suggestion and you're like, how in the world didn't I think about it? I mean, it's there. It's just there, right? A very interesting example, weird example, but interesting example is recently, today actually, I came into the office to do some work and then eventually to record this podcast. And so I got pressed, right? And so I wanted to use the toilet. And I just remember that the last time my wife came to the office, she bought a roll of tissue paper and placed it in the office. Now, I've been in this office, we've had this Salt Nation office for going on a year, and I've been coming here and I have never thought to buy a roll of tissue paper. And oftentimes when I want to, use the toilet, I start fumbling, or sometimes I end up holding it in and going home and doing my business. Do you get? And I don't know, there's just something about men where we're just not that attentive to the basics, right? At least that was the case with me. That is the case with me. And so when I just turned and I saw, where it was in the office, where she placed it in the office, I just smiled. Like, these are the little things that wives add to the lives of husbands that might seem so simple, might seem so little, but if you pause long enough to think about them, they make your life much, much, much easier. So it was the basic nature of oftentimes it was the basic nature of the suggestions that often pissed me off, and I would often rebel against her suggestions, not because I didn't think they were smart, but because I wanted to be the voice. I wanted to be able to say, yes, that's my idea, that's my idea, that's my idea. There was just something in me, it was ego that just wanted to be the man, so to speak. The fourth thing that I really struggled with was that I demanded respect by virtue of my position and not my consistent actions. I wanted to be venerated. I wanted to be respected, as every man wants to, right? Every man desires that veneration, that honor. But how do I say this? Oftentimes we want it on the basis of position alone, and not on the basis of our actions. Now let me break that down. Scripture does command the woman to honor and respect her husband, as she should. And Scripture also commands the man to love his wife as Christ has loved the church. Now, oftentimes, whenever we come to that place where we are enthused by the fact that we are the head of the home, we are the king of the home, we are the boss here, and all of that. Whenever we're enthused by that idea, I want us to pause for a moment. At least this was what I did. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, what does it really mean to be the head of the home? Is it a prescription of actions and responsibility, or is it just a position? Are you the Queen of England, or are you the Prime Minister of England, right? Of the Great Britain? Are you the Prime Minister? Or are you the Queen? If you're the Queen, or rather the King today, if you're the King, it's just ceremonial. You're just there as and even in today's time, even the King is no more as respected as Queen Elizabeth was. However, you find that if you're going to demand respect only on the basis of authority, now don't get me wrong, your spouse should give you respect on the basis of your position. She should. However, it's not our job to demand from the woman a demand that was placed on her by God. It's our job to tend to the demand that was placed on us by God. And oftentimes, it's in executing our duties as prescribed by God that we begin to get more, honor and respect as God has prescribed for the woman. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. So this is not to say that we should always react to your spouse, but I'm saying that we should take responsibility from our own vantage point to get the ball rolling. And if both parties or both partners in a marriage have this mindset, then it's just going to get better and better. It's just going to get better and better. So I found that I was demanding respect by reason of my position and not necessarily my actions. And so I decided to start becoming a little more intentional with earning the respect as opposed to just demanding it. Scripture says something really interesting. It says that we should only demand obedience when our own obedience is complete, right? So we can't just live in a generation where every man is shouting, "I'm the head of the home. Respect your husband, honor your husband, venerate your husband, worship your husband." But our own obedience to our own command is not yet complete. Now, I'm going to be ending this podcast today with some key things. There's a saying that I often say when I get the opportunity to teach or to share with different people. I often say that leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of the people that are in your charge. It's not about being in charge. It's about taking care of the people that are in your charge. So leadership is other facing. Leadership is focused on others, not focused on ourselves. And we often get it really mixed up when as husbands we are so focused on what we are getting, how we are being treated, how we are being venerated and honored. But we're so focused on ourselves. That's like flipping, that's like putting the horse before the cart, or rather the cart before the horse, right? Because really what God has commanded us to do is to take charge, or rather to take care of those who are in our charge. So I'm going to be drawing a few parallels between how men act at home, how oftentimes we act at home, how I acted at home as a young married man, and how we perceive leadership in the real sense. Now, let me give you an instance. You work in an organization or a company or some corporate kind of job, maybe a bank or something, and you have a boss who is just a pain in the patella, right? And you have this guy who is always demanding, have you met your quota? Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? He doesn't listen to anybody's opinion. He's a god, so to speak, in the workplace. And oftentimes, check the sentiment of everybody that works in that place. They don't like him. They think he's a tyrant. Nobody likes that person, right? Except those who are bootlickers, who just want to get close to him for the power, but that doesn't even mean they like the person. Now, you find, or let me give you another instance. You find that you're in a church, right? And this is very common in our generation, that you're in a church where the pastor is a god. Nobody can give him advice. No, how dare you even open your mouth, right? He's the only one that hears God, the only one that sees God, the only one that speaks on behalf of the church. And you can't even suggest. There's nothing. Over time, you get disillusioned, and you're like, okay, what's this really about, right? And you find that over time, your loyalty to these organizations begin to fade, and you find that in the case of a workplace or even a church, you begin to look for alternatives. You begin to look for a way out. You're looking for the best job. Igbo people will say, as some jobs become so you're basically just marking time with that job and looking for the nearest exit. And as men, we're often frustrated. We feel insulted by such bosses and such leaders. Like, I have something to add. Why won't you let me add value to this company or this organization, right? And yet when we get back home, we're exactly the same. So I walk into your house, and everything I see, there are seats in your parlor. It was your idea, it was your design. The curtains was your idea, was your design. The room, the beds, everything was your idea, was your design. The menu was your idea, was your design. Everything is an edict, right? If the woman does not feel like she's contributing to the building of that home in a very credible and verifiable way, she is constantly becoming disillusioned. Now, mind you, in the workplace, we find that we don't like our boss for having these same attitudes, but somehow we demand that our wife not just like us, but love us and be in love with us. And if she begins to withdraw and stops doing the things that show love, we also get irritated by it. And you find that we're building a castle on sand that is bound to crash at some point. Have you ever I've seen it so many times among different couples, and it almost happened in my marriage as well, where you marry a woman one of the reasons you were attracted to her was how capable she was, how brilliant she was, how she did things at work, how in charge she was, and these were the things that attracted you. But for some reason, you want to marry that woman and now be 100% in charge and subdue all of those elements. And I've seen so many women, assertive, brilliant, innovative, and then they get married and they just lose all of those qualities because there's an atmosphere at home that is not making for her flourishing. And it's so painful. It's so painful that many women get into marriage because of men who do not understand what marriage is, and they lose themselves. They lose their gifts, lose the very things that made them special. And so the man becomes the only superstar in the family. You find that there's so little that you can do alone with just your ideas. So little that you can do. I remember an instance that I had. My wife is a teens coach. She loves teenagers and she has a calling to them. And I remember when we got married, oftentimes when we go to church, immediately there was no official teens church in the church we attended, but every time after church service she would start her own teen service, right? The teenagers in the church would just gather around her. It was like metal is drawn to a magnet. They just gather around her. She's just talking, and oftentimes I was always annoyed by it because I wanted to go home, right? And she could go at that for like an hour, and I was often so frustrated. Whenever she's done, I'm angry, I'm scolding, I'm pissed. I'm like, why are you wasting my time and all of that, right? And I noticed that she was, because of that, whenever they come to her, she's trying to just dismiss them and so that there's peace in the home. However, I remember one Sunday as I sat there sieving through my teeth, basically angry. She was having this meeting again, and I was just sitting there. I just had the Holy Spirit speak to me so clearly and say, Chidike, if you frustrate this gift, if you frustrate this calling, then the woman that you married would soon over time cease to be that woman. You would feel it and you will see that the substance is lost, because everything that you're seeing now are the different aspects that make her who she is. Even the way she reacts with you at home, relates with you at home, is somehow inextricably tied to this bigger picture, and these are the little moving pieces that make her that person. So if you kill it, and oftentimes the struggles that marriages are having is that after 1, 2, 3 years, the woman gives up. She gives up trying to contribute. She gives up trying to add anything to that family. She's now just a yes sir man, and then it pisses the man off, and then the man himself loses interest, and then we find ourselves in this very dangerous cycle. So I'm going to end by saying this, or rather reiterating this: leadership is not being in charge, it is caring for the people that are in your charge. Is caring enough about them, enough for them to consider who they are, to consider the gifts that they have, to nurture it, and to create an environment that helps them prosper, helps them become their utmost. And that's it from me on today's episode of the Just Saying podcast. I know I've said a lot of things that have gotten your mind turning, but what do I know? I'm just saying. Till we see next time, I remain Sir Victory. Peace.